When you need 900 pieces of heavy machinery and your country has no functioning credit relationship with Western financial institutions, there is usually only one place left to turn: China. And for years, that has been exactly the deal across Africa. Need a road, need a port, need a railway, call Beijing. The financing arrives, the contractors arrive, the equipment arrives, and so eventually does the debt. This is the arrangement that has defined infrastructure development across the continent for the past 2 decades. So when Captain Ibrahim Traoré needed to rebuild an entire national road network from a starting point of barely 3,000 kilometers of paved road after 60 years of independence, the expectation was simple. He would do what everyone else did: take the Chinese loan, accept the contractors, accept the terms. Instead, he did something that nobody in the region expected. He bought the machines outright, with Burkinabe money, and handed them directly to his own soldiers. This is the story of how Burkina Faso took everything useful from the China relationship and refused everything that came with strings attached. To understand why Traoré's approach matters, you need to understand the standard deal that African nations have signed with China for the past 2 decades. It usually works like this. A government needs infrastructure: a highway, a railway, a port, a dam. It cannot raise the capital domestically. It cannot easily access Western development financing without IMF conditions attached. So it turns to Chinese state banks and construction conglomerates. China provides the loan, often denominated in dollars, sometimes secured against future resource revenue. A Chinese state-owned construction company wins the contract, frequently without competitive bidding. Chinese engineers, Chinese foremen, and in many cases Chinese laborers are imported to execute the project. The local government gets the finished infrastructure. China gets a multi-decade loan repayment schedule, often secured against the very resources, oil, minerals, agricultural land, that the country needs to develop its own economy. This arrangement has built impressive infrastructure across Africa. It has also left several nations carrying debt to GDP ratios that economists openly describe as unsustainable, with assets sometimes seized or renegotiated under pressure when repayment becomes difficult. Western analysts call this debt trap diplomacy. Chinese officials call it mutual development partnership. Whatever you call it, the structure is the same. Capital flows in, contracts flow to Chinese firms, debt flows back to Beijing for decades. This was the model everyone assumed Burkina Faso would eventually follow when it needed to rebuild a road network that had been neglected for 60 years. In late 2024, Captain Ibrahim Traoré held a massive national ceremony. Over 900 pieces of heavy engineering equipment, bulldozers, graders, excavators, compactors, low-bed trucks were unveiled in front of the entire nation. Most of the visible brands were top-tier Chinese heavy industry manufacturers: XCMG, Sany. At first glance, this looked exactly like the deal everyone expected: China selling equipment to an African government desperate for infrastructure. But then Traoré stood in front of the cameras and made something explicit that changed the entire meaning of the moment. By the authority of the people, I hand over these machines to you. These were not gifts from Beijing. They were not financed through a multi-decade Chinese state loan secured against Burkina Faso's gold reserves. They were bought outright, with Burkinabe state funds, derived directly from the nationalized gold mining revenue that Traoré's government had redirected away from foreign shareholders just 2 years earlier. The transaction with China was purely commercial: buyer and seller, cash for equipment, no financing arrangement, no multi-year repayment schedule, no collateral tied to future mineral extraction rights. China sold Burkina Faso machines. Burkina Faso paid for them. The relationship ended there. And then Traoré did something that no Chinese-financed infrastructure deal in Africa typically allows. He handed the entire fleet directly to the Brigade Nationale de Sapeurs, his own military engineering corps, not to a Chinese construction company, not to a joint venture with Chinese management oversight, to Burkinabe soldiers. Here is what makes this decision so significant. In the standard African infrastructure deal, buying the machines is just step 1. Step 2 is almost always who operates them and who profits from the contract to build the actual road. In most Chinese finance projects across Africa, the answer is a Chinese state-owned construction company, brought in as part of the financing package, employing imported Chinese engineers and foremen, with local labor relegated to lower-skilled support roles. This is precisely the model Traoré refused. He took the equipment purchasing relationship with China, which he was happy to use, because Chinese manufacturers offered competitive heavy machinery at workable prices. and severed it completely from the construction-execution relationship. The machines were Chinese-made. The roads being built with those machines are entirely Burkina-Bay-built. Military engineers, civilian volunteers, local materials, local gravel, local cement. This single decision dismantled the entire profit structure that usually accompanies Chinese infrastructure financing in Africa. There was no foreign construction contract margin to pay. There was no foreign engineering consulting fee. There was no debt service obligation stretching across decades. Just a one-time equipment purchase, paid in full, followed by execution entirely in Burkina Faso's hands. Traoré's own words on quality address the skepticism directly. As for quality, as you can see, for what has been launched, we do not want to lay tarmac and rubble. We want to build sustainable infrastructure. He was not interested in cutting corners just because the machines came from a commercial purchase, rather than a development financing package. The standard was the same. The ownership structure was completely different. Out of this decision came Faso Mayabo, Build the Fatherland, formally launched in October 20. The philosophy was direct: use Burkina Bay-owned machinery, Burkina Bay materials, and Burkina Bay labor to build roads at a pace and cost structure that no foreign finance model could match. By May 2025, the Ouagadougou pilot phase had already paved over 9 kilometers of city streets, almost hitting its initial 10-kilometer target. Specialized crews rebuilt roads, sidewalks, and medians across downtown boulevards, all using local labor and local materials. Simultaneously, more than 100 kilometers of major highway contracts were underway nationally. Here is where the comparison to the Chinese finance model becomes impossible to ignore. Reports indicate that Chinese-built roads in Africa often cost between $2 and $3 million per kilometer when financed through the standard loan and contractor arrangement. Burkina Faso's model, using locally purchased equipment, military engineers, volunteer labor, and domestic materials, is reported to slash that cost by over half. One road builder familiar with the program noted that using local gravel and community crews can reduce costs by 60 to 80% compared to foreign bids. Compare the historical pace as well. Previous Burkina Bay administrations, largely dependent on foreign finance contracts, managed just over 1,000 kilometers of road construction across 6 years, roughly 170 kilometers per year. Traoré's target, 5,000 kilometers per year, nearly 30 times the previous rate. And crucially, this is being financed mostly through national coffers and patriotic citizen contributions, rather than external debt. Now, to give a complete and honest picture, Traoré's government has not severed every financial relationship with foreign lenders. A few major legacy highway projects still utilize external financing. The RN23 highway was financed by Saudi lenders. The new Ouagadougou-Bobo Dioulasso highway is supported by a Chinese loan. This matters because it shows that Traoré's approach is not blanket rejection of foreign partnership on principle. It is selective engagement on Burkina Faso's terms. Where a foreign finance deal genuinely accelerates a strategic legacy project and the terms are acceptable, the government uses it. Where a project can be built faster, cheaper, and more sovereignly through domestic resources and Burkina Bay labor, that is the path chosen instead. This distinction between accepting a financing arrangement when it serves the national interest versus depending on it as the default option for every project is the heart of what makes Traoré's economic doctrine so different from the governments that came before him. The previous system treated foreign loans, whether from Washington, Paris, or Beijing, as the only available mechanism for any infrastructure project, large or small. Traoré treats them as one option among several, to be used selectively, and only when the terms are genuinely favorable. The real heartbeat of the construction, the day-to-day building, the paving, the training, the mobilizing, is happening inside the country using Burkina Bay hands and Burkina Bay materials. That is the part no foreign financing arrangement, Chinese or otherwise, was ever asked to fund. Here is what made this decision ripple far beyond Burkina Faso's own borders. For 2 decades, the assumption across West Africa has been straightforward. If you need major infrastructure and you cannot access Western financing on acceptable terms, China is the default alternative. Many governments in the region have structured their entire infrastructure planning around this assumption, treating Chinese loans as an unavoidable feature of development rather than one option among several. Traoré's approach broke that assumption publicly and visibly. He demonstrated that a government could purchase Chinese equipment as a straightforward commercial transaction, benefiting from competitive Chinese manufacturing, while completely declining the financing and construction contract bundle that usually comes attached to it. Buy the tool. Refuse the dependency. Mali and Niger, the other members of the Alliance of Sahel States, began studying the Faso-Mayabo model directly. If proven effective at scale, this approach could see military engineering corps replacing foreign contractors, whether Chinese, French, or otherwise, across the entire Sahel. The implication unsettles every party that has historically profited from the standard arrangement. Western development institutions lose their leverage through IMF and World Bank conditionality. Chinese state construction conglomerates lose their captured execution contracts. French engineering firms lose their historical default position as the regional infrastructure partner. All three lose ground to a model where the host nation simply does the work itself. Strip away the geopolitics for a moment and look at what was actually demonstrated here. Heavy machinery is a commodity. Bulldozers, excavators, graders, these are manufactured products available from multiple global suppliers at competitive prices. China happens to produce some of the most cost-effective heavy equipment in that category through manufacturers like XCMG and SANY. There is nothing wrong with purchasing that equipment commercially, the same way any government purchases vehicles, computers, or medical equipment from whichever supplier offers the best value. The mistake, the one that has trapped dozens of African nations in unsustainable debt cycles, is bundling that commodity purchase with a financing arrangement and a construction contract that extracts value for decades afterward. Traoré separated those two things. Buy the machine commercially, with cash, no strings attached. Execute the actual construction work domestically, with your own people, your own materials, and your own engineering corps. This is not anti-China. This is not anti-foreign investment. This is simply refusing to let a one-time equipment purchase metastasize into a multi-decade dependency relationship. It sounds almost too simple to be revolutionary. But across a continent where this exact distinction has rarely been made by governments desperate for any infrastructure financing they could find, simple is exactly what made it shocking. There is one more dimension to this story that pure economic analysis misses. When Traoré decided to build the roads with Burkinabe hands instead of foreign contractors, he was not just making a financing decision. He was making a decision about who gets to participate in building the nation. A foreign-financed Chinese contract typically arrives with its own imported workforce. Local labor, when included at all, is relegated to the lowest skilled, lowest paid positions on the margins of the project. The Faso-Mayabo model inverted that completely. An 80-year-old grandmother heard about the road building initiative on television and arrived at a construction site with 2 bags of cement bought from her own savings, insisting on delivering them herself. Another woman brought 30 bags of cement from her own pocket, declaring it her contribution to building the fatherland. Students on school break picked up tools to lay asphalt. Children on vacation molded pavement bricks with visible joy, being trained simultaneously in patriotism and practical skill. Soldiers worked alongside civilian volunteers, with military engineers serving as instructors teaching ordinary citizens to operate machinery and install sidewalks. None of this would exist under the standard Chinese-financed, Chinese-executed contract model. That model does not need a grandmother's cement. It does not need a child's enthusiasm. It does not need a soldier teaching a farmer how to grade a roadbed. It needs a loan agreement, a contractor, and a repayment schedule. By keeping the machines but rejecting the bundled financing and construction package, Traoré created space for an entire population to physically participate in the nation's own reconstruction. This is the part of the decision that no debt trap analysis or geopolitical commentary fully captures. The roads are not just cheaper and faster, they carry the literal handprints of the people who will drive on them. That is a form of value that no foreign contractor, however efficient, was ever going to deliver. China did not pressure Burkina Faso the way pressure typically works in international relations, through explicit threats or coercive diplomacy. The pressure was structural. It was the quiet default assumption built into every infrastructure conversation across the continent for the past 20 years. If you need to build, you need foreign financing. And if Western financing comes with too many conditions, Chinese financing is the path of least resistance. That assumption was the pressure. And Captain Ibrahim Traoré's unexpected move was to simply decline the bundled deal while still taking what was genuinely useful. He bought the machines. He kept the construction sovereign. He preserved a working commercial relationship with Chinese manufacturers, while refusing to let that relationship determine who builds Burkina Faso's roads, who profits from the contracts, or who holds leverage over the country's future. 900 machines, paid for outright, handed directly to Burkinabe soldiers, 5,000 kilometers of road targeted per year, 100 times Burkina Faso's historical pace. Costs slashed by 60 to 80% compared to the foreign contractor model that dominates infrastructure development across the rest of the continent. Financed mostly through national gold revenue and patriotic citizen contributions rather than external debt. This is the model Mali and Niger are now studying. This is the model that has every foreign infrastructure financier across West Africa recalculating their assumptions. Not because Burkina Faso rejected China, but because Burkina Faso proved that you can do business with anyone. Beijing, Paris, Washington, Riyadh, without letting that business define your sovereignty. Buy the tool, keep the nation. That is the move nobody expected. And it is reshaping the entire region's relationship with foreign infrastructure financing. 1 kilometer of sovereign asphalt at a time. This is arisen now.